When I initially started this channel, all of the editing for my videos was done on the Skylake desktop that was located in my office. But this then came with the inherent predicament that I would be locked in a dark room away from my family and the rest of society for hours at a time. So, to halt my gradual but inevitable descent into Gollum's translucent counterpart, I decided that I needed a more mobile editing workstation that would allow me the freedom to spend time with my family and produce some vitamin D while editing these videos. That's where the MSI GE72 2QF Apache Pro notebook came in, and at this point I've had this laptop for roughly 5 months. So, has it been a sufficient replacement for my desktop? Let's find out. Since I've owned this notebook for nearly half of a year at this point, this review will be less about the initial out-of-the-box impressions and more about the complete experience of owning this device. I couldn't give an out-of-the-box impressions video even if I tried, since the first thing I did with this laptop was rip out the 1TB 7200 RPM hard drive and install a 1TB Samsung 850 EVO SSD as my storage drive and a Samsung 950 Pro NVMe drive as my boot device. So I'm not entirely sure what the stock experience on this notebook is even like. But outside of the 1TB hard drive, the GE72 2QF comes equipped with an Intel Core i7 5700HQ processor clocked in at 2.7 GHz with a boost clock of up to 3.5 GHz. The base model comes with a single stick of 8 GB of 1600 MHz DDR3 memory, although I've increased that up to 16 gigs. And then for the GPU, it has an NVIDIA GTX 970M with a core clock of 1038 MHz and a memory clock of 1598 MHz. I'll come back to the benchmarks for all of those specs later. With regards to I/O, on the right there's a power input, SD card reader, a USB 2.0 port, and a DVD drive. On the left there are 3 USB 3.0 ports, a killer E2200 gigabit LAN port, HDMI and mini display port out, and then a microphone in and audio out 3.5mm jacks. On the back you'll find the exhaust for the dual fan configuration and an illuminated MSI gaming logo on the lid. And speaking of the lid, it comes with a pretty sweet looking brushed metal design. And then finally on the front there's some indicator LEDs regarding battery and hard drive status. For the display, it has a 17-inch 1080p IPS panel on a hinge that can lay back nearly 180 degrees, which makes it perfect for propping it up on the knees while in bed and I'm trying to get some work done. And with MSI's True Color software, it can get close to 100% sRGB color saturation, which is great for video editing. However, at least on my model, I have some fairly horrendous backlight bleed at the top right portion of the screen, and then minor portions of it elsewhere. I'm typically okay with a little bit of bleed on a panel, but this part is so egregious that I hate watching anything that has a darker tone to it since it always distorts the coloring. But other than that, there's nothing else to fault MSI for with regards to the display. The audio on the laptop is actually pretty good. There's 2 bottom-mounted front speakers as well as a subwoofer located on the bottom of the notebook. There's plenty of clarity in most audio situations, with there being some distortion once you push the volume past 75%. Although I do have to mention that for like the first half to 1 second that audio begins to play, like on a YouTube video, it only comes out of the left speaker and then the right kicks in after some delay. It's not a problem, just more of an oddity. The touchpad features a satisfying feel with its brushed metal design, and the left and right click buttons are properly positioned and have a normal tactile feedback. I mention this only because some laptop manufacturers can't even get something as simple as that correct, so good on you, MSI. The keyboard keys are among the best that I've ever used on a laptop, which is probably due to the fact that MSI has partnered with SteelSeries to make it. There's very little wobble to them, and there's a noticeable and pleasant tactile bump to them. And also they don't become mushy when you bottom them out, as I'm very prone to bottom out my keys when typing. There's a full 10-key numpad as well as a host of function keys built in. The spacing is great, and I never feel cramped using the keyboard even if I'm typing for hours at a time. There's only 2 things that I'd like to mention with regards to the keyboard, and they're completely preferential, so take them for what it's worth with a grain of salt. The first is that there's only a Windows key on the right side of the spacebar, which trips me up since I have a dominant left hand and use all of my modifier keys exclusively on the left side of a keyboard. The second preference issue, which slightly contradicts the first, is that I wish there was an additional function key on the right hand side. This is mainly due to the fact that I find myself wanting to adjust the brightness or volume while my left hand is occupied, like when a call comes in, but instead of being able to use one hand to hit both the function key and the volume down or brightness down keys, I have to use my left hand for the function and right to actually perform the action. Again, not an objective complaint, but just some things that have continued to bother me even after months of using the notebook. Getting to the backlight on the keyboard, there's a triple zone RGB lighting setup which can be controlled either through the SteelSeries Engine 3 software or the simple button that's located just to the northeast of the keyboard. This button allows you to cycle through the different presets, but won't allow you to change the brightness. However, in the utility, you can configure the color of each of the zones, their effects, as well as the brightness. There's also the ability to program macros in as well. It's definitely a simple to use and effective piece of software. The color and brightness on the keyboard rivals some of the Cooler Master and Corsair dedicated keyboards that I've reviewed previously. One of the great things about the coloring is the translucent bottom portion of the keycaps, which allow the lighting to come through effectively and evenly. Moving on to the other button adjacent to the keyboard preset modifier, it allows you to automatically set both of the rear fans to 100% speed. I actually have found myself using this more often than I anticipated due to the fact that the fan that's on the GPU side of the laptop rarely speeds up when doing CPU-intensive tasks like video rendering, even though their heat sinks are directly connected. And while both of the fans at 100% is noisy, it's actually not that bad, with either fan only registering it at about 55 decibels or so, which is certainly audible, but it's not annoyingly high-pitched or sounds like a jet turbine taking off. Then, as far as battery life goes, it's not awful, but certainly not great. The 6-cell battery managed 64 minutes in my real-world test of having the brightness on 65-ish% set to high performance mode and then genuinely using the laptop like I normally would during a day. So 64 minutes isn't great, but it's a gaming laptop, so I really wasn't expecting too much. And then I just have a small complaint about the power adapter. Its design makes it such that when you lift up the notebook, gravity pulls the adapter down so that you have to rotate it out of the way if you're attempting to set the notebook back down again. It's not major, but just a minor nuisance. The webcam experience is pretty subpar, with images always having too much noise, even in the best of lighting conditions. And then the audio recording is also particularly bad. As you can probably hear, the audio drops in and out as I'm recording. I've done my best to try to fix this problem with updating drivers, using MSI's Nahimic software, or a whole host of other applications, but no matter what, the audio still continued to sound like pure garbage. But overall, I very much appreciate what the Apache Pro has got going for it externally. But I'm also experienced enough to know that just because something is designed aesthetically to appeal to gamers, that does not at all mean it has the underlying hardware to back it up. So let's take a look at some of the benchmarks for the Apache Pro. Fortunately, the 5700 HQ and GTX 970M are more than adequate for the 1080p display the Apache Pro has. At the very highest settings, most games saw really good real-world performance. The Witcher 3, of course, is brutal, but still plays well if you're willing to drop the settings a smidge. So the GE72 2QF is definitely a solid performer. However, I mentioned some issues with the heat output of the notebook earlier, and in gaming, those issues continue to come through. With its power draw of 100 to 115 watts during an intense gaming session, the notebook has to dissipate that heat somewhere, and unfortunately it does so at least partially through the keyboard. It's not uncommon for the WASD region, you know, the keys that most games use, to get up to between 45 and 50 degrees Celsius, which made playing without an external keyboard an uncomfortable experience. The GPU side of the keyboard gets fairly toasty as well, but it's not as much of an issue because most games don't use those keys for every aspect of the game. So I'm not sure how to engineer a solution for this, but seriously MSI, your gaming laptops shouldn't be uncomfortably warm to play video games on. And mind you, this is both before and after I swapped out the thermal paste under the heat sinks, so it's not an inefficient thermal dissipation issue either. And this brings me to my next issue with the Apache Pro notebook. It's been all over MSI's marketing push recently that their laptops are upgradable with MXM modules, and they want notebook owners to have a longer lifespan for their device. I mean, the national sales executive and business developer for MSI South Africa mentioned in an interview a few weeks ago that they wanted users to be able to upgrade your graphics cards to future generations. If that's really the case, MSI, then why is it that I have to void my warranty on my notebook to be able to just even upgrade my RAM? I mean, even my wife's Lenovo laptop, non-gaming mind you, has an easy access slot to get at the things that you're most likely to upgrade. Why is it, especially with MSI's marketing of upgradability, that I can't have that same ease of access and peace of mind for a notebook that I paid significantly more for? I would really appreciate it if MSI took their philosophy of upgradable notebooks and applied it to their entire lineup, and not just the special super high-end ones that come with MXM modules. And despite the fact that I currently have no warranty on this machine and that it has some heat dissipation issues and its webcam and microphone solution is simply atrocious, I can confidently say that I don't miss my desktop at all. Sure, I will get better performance numbers with the Skylake 6700K in games and with rendering, but the freedom that this notebook has allowed me to have has been so great for myself as well as for my family. It's been awesome to lay down in bed, download the latest game, and then not have to give any second thought as to whether or not I'll be able to run it at decent settings. Or the fact that I'll be able to bring it with me to Computex and be able to edit videos quickly while I'm at the expo. The extra performance I get with my desktop just isn't worth sacrificing the freedom I have with the Apache Pro. After 5 months of owning this notebook, I don't have any regrets, especially after one of my friends just picked up an Asus gaming notebook and I got to check that thing out for a bit. Everything on the Asus notebook was pretty much verifiably worse. The panel, although IPS, had terrible color reproduction and viewing angles. The keyboard didn't have the keycaps with the translucent portion on the bottom except on the WASD keys, and the touchpad was awful both in use and feel, and also was without dedicated left and right click buttons. The only thing the Asus notebook really had going for it was its easy access port on the bottom to swap out the hard drive, M.2 drive, and RAM. I think it really does come back to that interview I mentioned earlier. The link, by the way, is down in the description if you want to check out that full thing. But essentially, the point that was trying to be communicated in the interview is that on an apples to apples comparison, an MSI notebook is a better option than their competitors. And I have to say, despite all of the flaws that the Apache Pro does have, that's actually a true statement. MSI has built a notebook that stands out because they seem to have perfected the thing that actually matters to consumers aesthetically without compromising on performance. The SteelSeries keyboard, the Dyne audio speaker setup, and the brushed metal design are exceptional. And even though I have one of the higher spec models, the fact that MSI offers these valuable features on their i5-960M models shows that they genuinely care about the consumer getting the best of both worlds. So the conclusion is pretty simple for me. MSI has won my heart with this notebook. And while my heart can easily be swayed back to the other manufacturers by them stepping up their game, I don't anticipate jumping ship anytime soon. MSI seems to have positioned themselves clearly ahead of the competition in the notebook market. So that's it for my review on the GE72 2QF Apache Pro notebook by MSI. Like this video if you found it helpful, dislike it if you thought it was poo, subscribe to stay up to date on all of my tech related content, and I will see you guys in the next video. Cheers.